I checked, Joanna, the webinar that we had last year. It was exactly 16th of April 2020, where we met the similar webinar, and the energy transition is again on turn. It's a different turn than last year, as you know, but let's see what happens with the numbers this year. Can you please let me know on chat whether you're with us? Just a couple of people, if you can say hello or whatever, so we know it works. Somebody's writing a message, so it means yes. Thank you, Robert and Camille. Okay, my name is Klaudia Wojciechowska, and I would like to welcome you on behalf of Forum Energii. And before I hand over to Joanna, just a quick organization issue. You can write to us on chat asking any questions you want to raise on energy transition in Poland. We'll be happy to answer at the end of this webinar with this Q&A session. Before we turn the questions, Joanna will give you a short info and presentation on how it is in Poland and how we are after a year in pandemic. And what else? I wish you a nice hour with Forum Energii. And Joanna, I would like to give the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Klaudia. I'm really pleased to welcome you today. And I'm Joanna Maćkowiak-Pandera. I'm leading Forum Energii, which is a think tank supporting energy transition in Poland. And short introduction from my side. So the pandemic has knocked Poles of balance, not only actually Poles, but then the entire world. And pandemic has had huge impacts on energy sector, how it operates, but also many effects regarding environment and business conditions. Electricity demand decreased, and it caused that it pushed out of the system old, inefficient coal-fired power plants. And the 2020 was for the first time ever a year in Poland where black energy decreased, was less than 70%. So it was unique year for Poles and for the nation, and it actually triggered the discussion about coal phase out, about climate policy. We saw in 2020 rapid growth in photovoltaics, which is quite remarkable. Many jobs have been created in the industry. It's mainly because of quite generous My Electricity program, subsidy scheme for many rooftop PV, but not only, also auctions organized for solar farms. What we unfortunately still do not see is basically the development of wind energy. A few years ago, government introduced distance regulation, so-called 10H rule, and it still blocks new investment in onshore wind. What is also quite interesting is development of offshore wind projects, and it seems that offshore wind is gaining the momentum at the moment in Poland. But certainly it will take several years until we will be able to report share of offshore electricity in Polish energy mix. However, some decisions have been taken. The Offshore Act is approved, and respective regulations are on the way. What we also see is significant diversification of gas supply. Poland has always had problem with gas use, and we only have about 5 billion of cubic meters of domestic gas, and gas was not seen as an option. Currently, there is huge enthusiasm toward gas, and the very political issue of supplies from Russia has been actually resolved, maybe not entirely, but this last year only 45% of gas came from Russia. What is another trend quite remarkable, which is making pressure on decision makers to act, are the wholesale prices, which are the highest in the region, which makes huge pressure on Polish economies to act. It's mainly because of CO2 prices, but also some inefficiencies in the power generation. So what are the trends? What are the achievements? I invite you to a tour, virtual tour of the Polish energy sector. The first slide is maybe good to remember that Poland belongs to the largest electricity markets in the EU. On this slide, we still see United Kingdom because it's data for 2019, where United Kingdom was still the member of the EU. So it's quite large. It's also reflected in the greenhouse gas emissions because, unfortunately, in terms of greenhouse gas emission, Poland also belongs to the leaders. In total numbers, we are the 5th biggest greenhouse gas emitter, but in terms of carbon intensity, generation or production of CO2 per capita, we belong to unfortunately, to the EU leaders. Capacities and electricity production. So what? As said, Poland is quite large country. We have about 50 gigawatt of available capacity in the Polish system. 65% of capacities are from coal. It's basically lignite and hard coal. When it comes to renewables, it's about 24% of capacities, mainly in onshore wind and photovoltaics, quite recently because of the fast solar energy development. The rest is natural gas and industrial capacities, as well as pump storage. If you take a look on changes, what have changed over last year in the context of available capacity? Despite difficult conditions for coal generation, new capacities of coal-fired, hard coal-fired capacity was added to the system. It was mainly Jaworzno generation block, about 900 of megawatt. At the same time, Pątnów, which is Wielkopolska region, Pątnów power plant was decommissioned, and it is about 400 of megawatt. New gas capacities were added to the system. It was Stalowa Wola block, and as you can see, huge shares of photovoltaics. I mean, huge share compared to the past, where we only 3 years back we basically didn't have solar energy at all. You can also see onshore wind, some new additions. It was mainly because of old projects and some auctions which were organized where indeed wind was a winner. But as said, new projects for onshore wind are missing at the moment in Poland because of this distance regulation. When it comes to electricity production, there are also some significant changes and interesting changes compared to the 20. I'll try to. I hope you can see my pointer. But basically, in 2020, we had around 69 electricity generated from coal, which is lignite and hard coal together, which is less compared to 2019, where we had above 73. And we can see respectively increase in generation from renewables and gas. By the way, you can find the entire report, yearly report, Energy Transition, on our webpage. I invite you to take a look and analyze the numbers in detail. When you take a look on changes in electricity production in 2020 compared to 2019, you can see that despite new addition of capacities, you can see that the production of hard coal decreased dramatically. It's about 7,000 gigawatt hours less compared to 2019. You can see also a huge decrease in lignite production, and basically all other energy sources have produced more electricity than before. So gas, pump storage, hydro, biomass, and onshore wind and photovoltaics. And last but not least, regarding electricity generation and capacity, you can see again that the changes in available renewable energy have changed over the years. So you can see quite stable share of capacities in wind, and very recently big increase in capacities from renewables. And now I would like to introduce you several slides regarding electricity prices and trade balance, because electricity prices are impacting very much trade balance between Poland and neighboring countries. If you compare the spot prices of electricity, you see that Poland belongs to one of the most expensive markets compared to Sweden, where we have strong interconnection to Sweden, Lithuania, Germany, Czechia, and Slovakia. Particularly in the pandemics, we are above even average. So it makes huge pressure on the decision makers to act. This pressure is coming from industry. There is huge critics and discussion in media about the cost of CO2, about the cost of coal. Currently, we have negotiations and talks between government officials and trade unions about a final date of coal usage. So the discussion is indeed taking place. If you take a look on the balance of domestic electricity production and consumption, you basically see that the blue line is the consumption. So the consumption of electricity has decreased or is decreasing step by step, but nevertheless, more rapidly production of electricity is going down. So currently we import record high numbers of electricity from abroad, above 13 terawatt hours, which is around 8% of our consumption in the country. So it is also a proof that that the energy sector in Poland is on turn, is on verge, and we see what comes next. Certainly, Poland is too large country to depend entirely on imported electricity, so we need to care for on electricity generation as well, even if electricity imports are certainly strengthening our security of supply. Now several slides about coal and gas situation. You can see that domestic hard coal production this is basically trends which continues since 20 years, that the domestic hard coal production is going down. If you compare 2011, we produced more than 23 million tons less of coal in 2020. 2019 and 2020, so within a year, we reduced coal production by 7.7 million tons. And Poland is now, or since a couple of years, is facing a challenge to cover its domestic demand with domestic coal production. And this is becoming a huge political issue, because the argument which was used for years in Poland was that we want to use coal because it's our domestic source, it gives us energy independence. And we can see now that since few years it's not possible anymore. The consumption of coal is still quite big. It's not only about electricity sector when we focus today on electricity sector, but Poland also consumes a lot of coal in heating, in the district heating system, but also we burn a lot of coal in the house stoves, in single houses, which, by the way, causes big air pollution in cities, in villages, particularly in the southern part of Poland. If you take a look on the trade balance of steam coal, you see that mainly Poland basically does not export coal anymore. We became import country for coal. You see that this red color is basically Russia, but we mainly import coal from Russia. We mainly import coal from Colombia and Kazakhstan. Other countries much less. Even the 2018 was record high when it comes to imported coal. Numbers now decreased slightly, but still it's quite remarkable trend that we have a challenge to cover domestic demand for coal. There is also one coal paradox, we call it at Forum, is basically consumption and production is of coal is going down, but what is going up is storage, stocks for coal. It's because of subsidies for coal production, extraction. It's because of subsidies for storage. We have now about 15 million tons of coals at stock, which is about 25% of yearly consumption. So it's you can say that we are safe when it comes to coal supply in Poland, at least for half a year. What is also remarkable, and I mentioned it at the beginning, is the supply of natural gas and the diversification of gas supplies to Poland. You can see that this red color again is Russia. East is mainly, let's say, the number of or the description of the official statistic is what mainly it's Russia. Eastern direction, and you can see that that the share or the number of coal imported from Russia has gone slightly down, and increased consumption of gas has been covered with other direction, including Qatar, and which is LNG, and US LNG. Norway, Germany is still probably above all Russia, but nevertheless it's Western direction, you can say, and other EU countries much less. And one of the last slides, it's steam coal and natural gas prices. What you can see is basically the red line is the simply saying it's Polish coal price, domestic coal price, and you can see that you have the blue line is natural gas, and ARA coal price is basically international coal price. So you see that since two years, domestic coal is much more expensive. Of course, in the past, it was not always the case. You can see that in 2016, 2017, Polish coal was cheaper than the international prices, but nevertheless, in recent years, Polish coal is quite expensive. Certainly, it has an effect in geological conditions, in the labor costs, and other structural factors which impacts coal production in Poland. Greenhouse gas emissions, last but not least, you can see that total national greenhouse gas emissions have fallen by around 90% since 1990 and 5% only since 2005. so it's not much. It looks a little better when it comes to the power and heating sector greenhouse gas emissions. So you see that the greenhouse gas emissions in the power sector have fallen by around 29% since 2005, and around 21% in the heating sector since 2005. It's unfortunately, when it comes to the electricity generations, I think that the trend will not last for this year. You can see our estimations, which are those dots. We calculated it based on electricity production, and indeed it was pandemic year, so it was unique. I think, and actually we see it already now, that the trend does not continue, and the emissions are growing. Demand is even higher at the moment than before pandemic, like February, March last year, before lockdown was introduced. It's not that we are on the good track and some structural changes have been undertaken. It's still a challenge how Poland is going to reduce emissions, particularly in the context of newly adopted 55 emission reduction target in the EU, where Poland would certainly contribute to this, at least 43% to 51%, what we have calculated in autumn. So challenges ahead of the energy sector in Poland are still huge. And the last slide's main conclusions. We see that the share of coal in electricity generation fell below 70%. It's unlikely that it will be kept for 2021. Unfortunately, some structural changes are still needed in order to lower the emissions from the energy sector in Poland. What is very positive is the development of renewables, and Poles are really in love in photovoltaics. You can see we have above 200,000 prosumers at the moment. Prosumer is mainly rooftop PV, and there will be a change in the support scheme for photovoltaics, but I still think that because of recovery funds of the EU and because of big incomes coming from the CO2 revenues to the state budget, and we hope, and there are announcements of the government, that the trend of photovoltaics development will continue. Particularly, it's also needed from the power system perspective, because Poland faces huge challenge when it comes to the electricity generation in summer, where some thermal power plants, they face challenge of low water table and high temperatures, and renovation of the power plant, which is always conducted in the summer period. So we need power generation. It's not only the fancy flower, like fancy addiction to the Polish ambitions of being climate friendly, but it's also needed from the power system perspective. Electricity generation declined for the first time since many years by almost 4%. And demand, it was electricity generation, and the electricity demand decreased by 2%. It's quite new, because for years we have observed the trend when the electricity demand was bigger and bigger, and the trend is now slightly down. What we have seen also, where we have seen the record, was the net imports of electricity, which reached above 300 terawatt hours, and it was 8% of electricity consumption in Poland. And consumption and production of coal have decreased as well, has declined, but coal reserves are at the highest levels since many years, and it's above 15 million tons at the end of 2020. And last but not least, I think that what we see now that Poland is really changing its energy policy. Of course, it's extremely controversial. There are a lot of political debates about whether it's good direction or not. But I think what you can see, and I think that this pandemic year has really strengthened the trend that nobody believes in coal anymore. What is still a question mark, what can replace effectively coal? 2 months ago, government adopted new energy policy in which renewables are seen as an alternative, gas and nuclear. So basically, Poland goes nuclear. I don't want to comment it. What we have to focus on is basically the short-term perspective. I think nuclear is really long-term, and we need to cover the coal gap, which emerges very soon. Like in 5-7 years, we will face huge generation gap when it comes to coal, and only renewables with some share of gas can effectively replace it. What we can also see, it's basically challenge of utilities, how to convert to green, how to go green, because utilities have limited possibilities at the moment to obtain financing for those big projects which are in the pipelines. So currently we face huge discussion about divestment of the coal assets, and still the question mark, who should own it, who should buy the assets, coal asset, and manage it in future once biggest Polish utilities don't want to do it anymore. So those are the biggest questions which we have currently on the agenda. And I would like to thank you very much for the attention, and looking forward if you have any questions.
There are a lot of questions, and there is no censorship, Joanna, so get ready for some questions dedicated to energy mix, but also a bit more political question. Maybe let's start with a question from Camille on the PV. Okay, I will display it here. Could you share more information on the increase of PV last year? Do you think this is something to stay? What do you think is leading these new projects? Are these private investors or local actors? Camille is saying that the transposition of RED II is very slow, and municipalities complain about the lack of predictability of the national legislation. So how is it with the PV, Joanna?
There was indeed, I would say that 75% of new capacities addition were caused by the very generous subsidy scheme, support scheme, Mój Prąd, My Electricity, and indeed and the rest is coming from auctions. Indeed, I think that the current system is quite unpredictable. So the Ministry of Climate have announced that the new subsidy scheme, because basically it expired, this My Electricity program expired in December, and now we wait for the new turn, and Ministry of Climate have announced that it will start very soon. But indeed, it's very much subsidy-driven development, which means a lot of factors like regulatory. You can easily steer, stop, and kill and develop this sector. We see also, because the wholesale electricity prices increased dramatically in recent 2 years. So now we observe quite big interest coming from the industry and companies to invest in own generation PV, but still it's quite a tiny share of the entire market. So indeed, I agree with you. Also, in the context of renewable law and auction scheme for renewable, it's indeed the government can announce new auctions, or it cannot. You can also stop it. So it's very much politically driven. I don't see in the energy policy big plans for photovoltaics for 2030. It's around I think 6 to 8 gigawatt. It means that there is a question mark how the market can develop in future. And I still think that there is this resistance coming from the decision makers that renewables can effectively fill the coal gap. Of course, you need to reorganize the market. You need to have differently designed electricity market. You need to have flexibility of the entire system in order to assure that renewables, which are, when wind is not blowing and sun is not shining, so you still need to have other resources which will enter the system. So those, let's say, discussions we see at the moment in Poland. I hope I replied to your question.
Yes, but let's stop a bit with the renewables. There's one more question from Kemi Aida. Do you have any local PV production plant with a high local content in Poland? If not, how do you see any impact from EU plant border adjustment measure after some years later? How is your opinions on hurdles for Poland to increase offshore wind? And a question about the hydrogen, green or blue production project. So with this renewables, hydrogen, offshore and PV still, local plants.
Local plants. So there is now a plan to be gigafactory for PV within the recovery plan. So Poland, indeed, because of the pandemic and interrupted supply chains, which indeed have caused huge challenges for the PV industry last year. I admit there was some delays. So now there are plans to subsidize and to give the state subsidies for such PV plant. I don't want to comment because we didn't analyze if that makes sense, if it will be easy or not, and how to assure still that the prices and the quality will be at the good level. But I think that Poland tries now to internalize renewables as own, technology, or to create also jobs in the industry, the renewables industry. Particularly, you can see it in the context of heating, clean heat, and thermal isolation of buildings, where the potential for job markets it's quite huge. And how I see the hurdles for Poland to increase offshore wind. So currently, as I said, Poland adopted offshore wind law and the regulation which plays the maximum or sets the price for offshore wind, but still what is a challenge that this scheme, offshore support scheme, needs to be adopted and agreed with the European Commission quite quickly because of regulatory changes and coming from renewable directive. This scheme is designed under old scheme. The new one will enter in June into force. So we are under pressure to agree with the EU on how the entire system should be organized. We are now in April, so it's huge time pressure. The interest of the utilities for offshore wind, Polish state utilities, is huge. So basically you can see that this is a major transformation project for them. So they, and in that case, the local context issue plays a big role. So there are shipyards in Poland. There are also very strong push from the regions and like north regions, which see the chance for themselves because many of the products need to be developed locally for offshore wind. So the interest is big. So the first offshore wind farm should be commissioned in 2026, I think. It's the PG official plan. I think it's very much ambitious agenda, but still it's official plan. And then we see the current, let's say, plan is about 10 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity until 2020, 2030. So, but let's make the first step, and schemes need to be adopted, agreements need to be signed.
And how is it with the hydrogen?
Hydrogen. Poland have consulted recently, have introduced a strategy for hydrogen. The Basically, we see now that hydrogen, regardless if it's green, blue, or gray, is treated quite equally, which is a question mark whether it's good strategy or not. Also having in mind the role of gas in the Polish power system, and still high imports of gas. I see that the potential of green hydrogen is big. Still, we did analysis which will be published very soon on green hydrogen, where we can see that Poland will face a challenge in order when we would. Of course, green hydrogen has a big role to play. So you probably cannot at the moment plan full decarbonization of the power system without nuclear or green hydrogen. But then we would really need to start developing renewables very rapidly, about 5 gigawatts of capacities in wind and solar yearly. And, until now we have developed above 4 gigawatts of PV and 6 gigawatts of wind, a little more. So it would mean that our multi-yearly efforts need to be now repeated each year, which is huge investment pressure. But nevertheless, also green hydrogen is a very sexy topic, I admit, and all utilities are now very much talking about they want to enter this market and they want to develop the first project. By the way, we have already some hydrogen projects, not entirely new, but electrolysis is quite new. But the interest of utilities is high.
Okay, let's take another question from Bonn, from Gorg Broda. How do you personally see? And yes, I have a lot of friends here on the chat. I see. How do you personally see and analyze the problem of Nord Stream 2? It's the question from Gorg. So it's about your personal opinion, Joanna.
It's not about my personal opinion, because it's about overall opinion about future of Polish and basically European power system. So in my view, it's completely intransparent when Germany is talking about full decarbonization. Nord Stream 1 is still not fully filled, and there are still some capacities. We are phasing out gas, and then on top of this, Nord Stream 2 is coming. So in my view, it's intransparent, and I'm afraid about how it will impact, or how it impacts now the discussion within the EU, which is of course difficult. So we see, it's not only about climate, it's about rule of law and other challenges which EU is facing. And I have some doubts whether Nord Stream 2 is a good project, honestly speaking, but in not, personal point of view, but basically having in mind that we have committed to be climate neutral as Europe by 2050.
Right. I displayed another question by Grzegorz. It's about, predicting the future a bit, but taking into consideration tendencies in the last years, what mix of production energy, coal, gas, renewables is expected by Forum Energy in 2025?
It's a very good question. I think in 2025 it will not be as different as today, much different compared to today. I see, we did an analysis for the 2030 where we see that the share of renewables will grow and can reach about 43%. At the moment, as you could see, it's around 17%. So it can more than double by 2030. And we see also that the share of gas, Poland still needs some flexible gas-fired power plants. We basically do not have such flexible gas-fired plants. So we see around 3 gigawatts of new capacities in gas. And we did modeling with Energy Institute from Gdańsk for the 2030, and such system, having in mind that huge coal capacities will be phased out by then, such system will operate safely. So this is our view. You can take a look on our analysis. I think it's also translated, it's also available in English. And that's the future.
And you can also check the predictions in our analysis of the modernizing lignite triangle. So this is the place where we also give some predictions on the renewables. We give 30%, gas 13%, and coal 54%. You can check this analysis. Is also available on our website. It's a bit more about Germany, Czech, and Poland. So recommendable from our site.
Yes, if I may add to it, because indeed lignite is also becoming a very interesting topic. Poland is very much looking forward in the direction of Germany and its decision to phase out coal by 2038, which is still quite far away in the future. And we see that after 2025, because capacity market will be phased out for coal, basically because of 550 gram per kilowatt hour emission performance standard. So Poland will face capacity challenges in the next 5 years. It will be really huge, and this lignite triangle is another topic, because the future of lignite, future of Bełchatów, which is the biggest power plant in Europe, is also under question now. There is a debate what is the future of lignite in Poland, which is quite different compared to the coal, where you can still hard coal import from any other country, despite the challenges of the local production. With lignite, it's not as easy. So I encourage you to take a look on to this analysis, which is quite complex and focuses not only on Poland, but also Germany and Czechia.
And question from Jonas Kreuzl: since Poland increases electricity imports, do you think more electricity interconnectors will be built to import even more power from abroad?
Very good question, and I think it's not only about interconnectors, so entire grid needs to be rebuilt. So interconnector is only like, it's like part of the project. And what we are facing at the moment on the German-Polish border is that the third interconnectors it's somehow in the future, lies in the future, is considered, but there are still challenges on the existing interconnectors to be solved with uncontrolled flows. I think the situation got better in the recent years, but there are still some delays on the both Polish and German side to rebuild the grid. It's not only about interconnector. What is decided is this electricity link to Lithuania, and this will probably progress. It's still quite, political. I think that all the interconnectors issues, and it's about some protectionism, about the future of the domestic energy markets and price development and decisions. Also, in example, in Sweden, the decision to phase out nuclear, the same in Germany, but also future of gas and coal. It will very much impact the prices, and then it's the driver for the discussion. But at the moment, I don't see any very much ambitious discussion that Poland will now invest in interconnectors dramatically. I see now that some decisions are taken, some are still in the are, let's say, placed in future, and challenges with flows, with prices, with politics, in my view, are at the first front at the moment.
It looks like we're bombarding you with a question, and it's so quick and exciting. And another question from Pavel about decentralization of the power generation market. Will this happen? And if so, what part of the market will work in that way? What can be the biggest challenges related to that decentralization?
It's decentralization is indeed a big topic. So I don't know exactly what you mean. What we believe as Forum, we also wrote an analysis to this. It was locational pricing. This is something which, in my view, lies in the center of decentralization, because once I truly believe that decentral sources have only the future, like renewables, and we will also face the challenge of grid deployment. It's not about generation sources; it's about grids and about right price incentives. To build grids and generation exactly where is it needed. So it's big transition, because our system was built in 50, 60, 70, where load centers and were located close to the mines, like Silesia in example. And I mean, the structure of the demand is changing in the country. And in my view, we need to adjust it. And the response to this is exactly locational pricing, which in very simple words, it gives the price for electricity delivered or consumed, not generated, because at the moment you price basically electricity which is generated, and then all the other costs are somehow intransparent. Who causes cost? Who causes? How to also minimize the cost of electricity delivery. But unfortunately, this discussion is not taking place in Poland. We are talking now about some big political projects, about future of coal, about production of coal. I really very much miss now in Poland, but also in Europe, discussion about future electricity design of the power market. Some changes are taking place because balancing market reform is underway. It's basically pushed by network codes. Many changes need to take place through the network code, so it's not big political debate, but decisions are taken. But I believe, as said, decentralization, locational pricing, and the role of smaller resources which just will be built because it will be just like economically viable. But you need to give right price incentive in order to place those sources exactly where the grid also needed, if or a load exists, and then to build the grid. Yeah.
This is not that far from what you have just said. It's about dynamic electricity prices, and it goes very much on time as we're soon publishing the report on tariffs. How do you access possibility of implementation of dynamic electricity prices for households in order to promote demand response, demand management, to fit it in renewable energy production profile?
Exactly, this links indeed very much to the locational pricing, because once you have very flat wholesale prices, dynamic pricing will not play its role which it should play in future. So, of course, the future of the energy market or electricity design of the market should be that the dynamic prices, they reflect the real demand, real situation in the power system. So it's the lowest, in order to avoid a big reserve and huge capacity costs, we can convert the market in a way that it will reflect the current situation of the power system. But dynamic electricity prices will not play this role. Of course, will probably teach consumers how to do it. Will teach also entire DSOs how to organize it. But nevertheless, the TSO will not have benefits when still the entire market will be quite flat. So it's huge topic. I'm afraid that once the debate on energy and climate is so much politicized and also, for me, sometimes really unsatisfactory. So I really miss deep discussions, technical ones on how to make the real change and not how to make some fake changes in the Polish power system. I'm really afraid that such discussion is in current times quite difficult. But of course, it's the future. So with increasing number, with own generation, more and more active role of consumer, in Poland we call it prosumer, which is consumer and producer of electricity. We you know, there is no other way. I mean, it's the future. But then the question about gravity, about implementation, about decisions which are associated with this.
And Joanna, we have 2 more questions. So these will be super difficult, I believe, and super political. Sorry, but you know, no censorship. According to a preliminary agreement with the mining unions, Poland plans coal exit for 2049. Is it a realistic date? Do you think it could actually happen sooner?
I think it's a very good question, and I can only say that this is, in my view, completely out of reality. In the context of what you could see on our slides about the electricity production, it's not only about we can you know, produce coal, but who will buy it? Basically, you can see that the world is not interested in the Polish coal, and the challenge for coal in Poland is that we have really air pollution challenge. It's driving the discussion about, and actually the Polish state energy policy decided to phase out coal from single households by 2030 in the cities and 2040 in villages. So we will also get rid of coal from house stores. Heating systems are under huge pressure because of CO2 prices, because district heating systems, many small ones. Poland has one of the best developed district heating system in Europe. So it's actually a great asset because for the decarbonization, it's easier to decarbonize district heating system compared to the single household. So district heating is really an asset, but with coal it will not fly. So we will go down with coal consumption also in the district heating systems. And the generation, this is exactly what I have said. So 70% of coal-fired power plants, they are old, they are inefficient and need to be replaced with new ones. You cannot build new coal-fired power plants because we had this Ostrołęka project, which you may have heard about, which is actually a big scandal because of more than billion zloty which have been invested in the project, and now it's abandoned, and it was really pure waste of money. So coal is not the future anymore. So who would buy this coal in 2030? And on top of this, you have basically demand coming from the trade unions. I don't want to say miners because I really very much appreciate also hard miners' job, but trade unions, they demand that the coal production will be subsidized. So they know that basically Polish coal will be uncompetitive in future as well. It is now uncompetitive and will be even more in future. Because of geological conditions, because of cost of labor. So it's huge challenge. There is now a discussion on Just Transition Fund, which is taking place. Just Transition Fund is a fund which is designed by the European Union in order to help coal regions to transform and not to take the high cost of job losses. Poland, by the way, has very many bad experiences from the 90s with bad transformation. We can now make it better. I hope we did.
Exactly. This is the question that actually appeared as the first one. So what role do financials such as Just Transition Fund play in Poland's transition away from coal? And which actors and groups are those who demand such payments most urgently?
So indeed, certainly the green, recovery plans, which are on top of EU budget, and also EU budget discussion, multi-annual financial framework is playing very strong role as a driver, which motivates the region to prepare the plans to move away from coal. So it's certainly something which is a driver, and particularly because utilities, the state-owned utilities have lost dramatically their value, about 60-70% in the recent years. So they are very much attached to the financial markets. I'm not talking now about EU funds, but I'm talking about just commercial funding, financing coming from banks. Banks also withdraw from coal investments, even gas investments are in some places already not very much welcome. So this is certainly another driver for Polish complex energy and climate situation, which drive the debate. And which groups are let's say touched or should be reflected in those plans. I really
prioritized,
think, yeah, I really think we should think about people, about regions, about miners, but we should protect jobs. We should protect people, not jobs. And this is about. I really think that for the Silesia regions, PGG, which is the biggest coal producer, hires about 50,000 people. So and they are really on the verge of collapse. They are missing money like month by month. Decisions are missing. And in my view, it could be really a challenge for the regions when the company will just collapse and the politicians will not care about what happens with those jobs and with those people. But you cannot push it just month by month, because it's, the trend is inevitable. So I would expect more gravity coming from decision makers and from more honesty also on what the future is and how to really avoid disaster in those coal regions.
Yeah, now we have 3 questions and we are running out of time. So let's take last question. Last question from Matthias Zone. 2049, this is the year. How do you regard the contemporary political climate in Poland, understanding among Poles that the lignite and hard coal is dying, maybe even before 2049? Anti-EU resentment on that account, or rather the opposite? How do you see it? This is the last question. 2 other that we have about the chicken production. This is very interesting, and whether Poland is checking this kind of biomass types. I'm afraid we cannot answer that today, but we'll take it and we'll think about it in our team. And we have also a question about the energy storage. We'll take a look on that as well. But this is the last question from Matthias that Joanna goes to you.
I think that if you take a look on polls, what people think in Poland, they go for renewables. So it's quite clear. I know that also government has some analysis on what are the let's say, concerns and what people think. And you see that also in the recent years, the interest in climate policy, or actually worries about, environment future and the future for our children increased. So I think there is now more concerns, there are more concerns about climate, environment, and strong preference to invest in renewables. But this is, general opinion. You see huge interest in PV generation. It also increases acceptance for renewables. I think it plays a role that everybody now wants to generate on electricity. When it comes to miners, what I do not understand, that basically literally is one person from the government talking to the miners, and it is called social agreement. In my view, it's far from being a social agreement, because we would need engagement of other stakeholders and, to find that compromise, what the date could be. So certainly not 2049. I think it will be around 2030, 2035 when it comes to the mining, realistically. And the citizens, I don't know if citizens are really very much interested, unfortunately, in let's say miners' future. I think it's really political concerns. I think that Poland, as many countries in the world, is facing many inequalities and income differences between regions. So, of course, in bigger cities, you have more progressive approach toward end of coal, and in the villages and province you see that people are concerned maybe a little more that and they maybe a little from their perspective they see the challenge of phasing out coal, that people should not lose jobs from one day to another. So this is, I think, what we see. But generally, it's quite interesting because since 2 years, everybody basically, apart maybe from one party, all the political parties in Poland have developed climate program, climate agenda. It's one of top priorities. You see now that New Deal, Polish government is developing New Deal with 5 priorities. And basically climate and environment is one of those priorities. So it's completely new. So we didn't see it before. So, but from declaration to the real change is far. You need to make a lot of steps.
Thank you, Joanna. Thank you for staying with us for 1 hour. It's 11. Hopefully, there will not be that busy day for you. Let me use this just a moment as you're here, still 40 people with us. Can you please write on chat whether there are topics you would be interested to listen? Like we as Forum Energy, we're all the time looking for topics that could be interesting for international community related to electricity markets, heating, cities, whatever. If you have any idea that could be interesting for you to listen during our webinars, podcasts, or opinions, just share it with us on this chat today. Just energy transition in Silesia. First idea. We'll of course block it and take a look at that after the webinar. So we're not going to discuss that. But I was just, we are looking for the opportunities to ask you what kind of topics are the most interesting. So we'll be checking that. Somebody else is writing more ideas about measures to really improve air quality in Poland. Richard Stevens, we're doing this LEADER program, Joanna. Maybe this is also a good opportunity to say that we're covering another 15 cities with our activities on LEADER program. So hopefully we'll be back with that topic very soon. So 2 ideas for now. If you have more, just don't hesitate to drop us a line and share with us your opinions. Somebody else is writing. Okay, so this is all for, and this offshore. Okay, also good to know. This is always interesting to see. Right, Joanna Maczkowiak-Pandera was the guest today, guest and a host at the same time, the CEO of Forum Energy. I'm Klaudia Wojciechowska. Yeah, I was a bit the host. I was the host.
A guest.
Yes. Thank you very much for being with us, and see you next time. Hopefully in one of these on-site events, not only online. And hopefully in April 2022 there will be a webinar for sure, but hopefully we don't need to wear masks anymore and we see each other in the park or having a cafe in the cafeteria. That will be,
thank you very much,
very interesting. Thank you very much.
And have a good day. Bye bye.
Have a good day. Bye bye.